to Proudly Asian, a podcast series that tells bold and proud stories of Asians by Asians. I'm Isabel Wong, a financial journalist who wants to uncover the many Asian stories around us that are waiting to be told. There's never just one way to look at Asians. This podcast will take you through a deep dive into the life stories, struggles, and triumphs of young Asians around the world. Hello everyone, this is Isabel. For our regular listeners, you notice this episode is not the usual format. Yes, because I feel like it might be nice to sit down for a chat, just you and me, from time to time. So grab a cup of tea or coffee, or sit back, but don't fall asleep when you're commuting, or just relax and treat this as a pillow talk if you're getting ready to go to bed. A recent Proudly Asian moment was when we were featured on the homepage of Apple Podcasts in the US as part of their celebration of the Asian American and Pacific Islander Heritage Month. I did not realize Proudly Asian was featured until one of the podcasters featured on the list kindly tagged us. I remember I literally just woke up, wasn't sure what I was looking at just yet, and then I asked my partner to give me his phone because his is still connected with the US App Store. I opened the Apple Podcasts app and bam! Proudly Asian is up there. I couldn't believe my own eyes, and after 5 minutes of staring at the screen, I cried. I shed tears of joy not just because Proudly Asian was featured, it was also because of the indescribable feeling of seeing Asian voices being celebrated on major platforms. It's a moment where Asians get to define Asians instead of having top-down content fed to us about what Asians should be like. You might tell me, Isabel, this is not the first time Asians show up on a major platform. But I'm sure most of you still remember the days when Asian content was considered kind of weird and they would normally exist in some very hard-to-find corners on an in-flight entertainment system because they weren't considered major. Or whenever we used to see Asian actors in Hollywood movies growing up, they would always only be cast for some quirky characters and usually with a heavy Asian accent, despite the actual actors themselves speak native English without an accent. And our guest in episode 10, Hong Kong Indian entrepreneur and photographer Ancho Watwani, also told us she experienced typecasting as an actress.
I've been asked by major companies oh, we want to hire you for our production. We think you're a good fit. Okay, tell me about the role. You have to play a gangster who's kidnapping somebody. I was me, a gangster kidnapping somebody? Great. So because I'm a skinny female, if I was physically to kidnap anybody, I think I couldn't do it. If I was the person being kidnapped,
yeah,
I think that makes
that
sense.
Would be more convincing.
It doesn't work. It doesn't make any logical sense. And you want me to be someone kidnapping. And who am I kidnapping? Some girl. And I have 2 gang mafia dudes with me in the scene. I'm like, hell no.
And I also don't remember Asians being presented as genuinely cool or attractive people until the movie Crazy Rich Asians came out back in 2018. That was when the Western media would come out with headlines like, Asian men could be attractive, just look at Henry Golding. For the first time, Asians were not cool because they knew kung fu or martial arts. Well, one could argue most of the Asian characters in Crazy Rich Asians are rich, so that's why they are cool. But again, the characters were not presented in a stereotypical way where they had to wear qipao, a straw hat, and put on a heavy Asian accent. They were kind of in their natural states, so it was refreshing. I mean, yeah, to see Asian podcasts that amplify real Asian voices being celebrated and on the front page of a major platform like Apple Podcasts was a pretty emotional moment. And the sentiment I felt at that particular moment was quite similar to what our guest for episode 12, South Korean journalist Danny Park, described when I asked him how he felt as a Korean seeing Korean drama and music taking center stage globally.
I remember seeing this clip of Korean American actor Randall Park go on the Ellen Show, and then he explained how he cried at the BTS concert. Even though it was the first time he was seeing them, he wasn't a big fan of them, but he still cried because it was just seeing that hundreds of thousands of people of all nationalities and all color, they're dancing to a Korean artist. So I think what I feel is similar to what Randall felt. Some people may not think it's a big deal, but yeah, as I told you, I remember how little was known about Korea back in 2006, or how unappreciated culture and pop culture of South Korea was in the US or just anywhere. To imagine, those were just 2 or 3 years of my life, but for people like Randall, having grown up as a Korean in the US in the 80s and the 90s, I imagine that it'd be very touching for him.
But also, I would like to congratulate all the podcasters who were featured, including our friends from the West Asian Podcast, Ben and Ling Ji, who were featured alongside Asian comedians. It is not easy putting out weekly content, I must say. And most of us do it on top of a day job, except when you sit on bags of cash and enjoy a semi-retirement life. Now, since the beginning of Proudly Asian, many of you ask, why I do what I do. How did it all begin? I must say Proudly Asian is a project that's years in the making. I'm sure most of us have gone through the moments when we were a child where we didn't know exactly what it meant to be Asian because it wasn't taught, nor would it be mentioned in our daily conversations with our teachers and friends, because growing up as an Asian, we would be told it's better to stay quiet about our Asianness. It's better to eat the same food that your friends who aren't Asian eat. You hide your otherness to be able to fit in. And it's not quite like you're trying to forget who you are, your own culture, but it's some sort of survival instinct, especially when you're young and just wanted to fit in. And our guest on episode 1, Scottish Chinese food blogger Amber Lai, also shed some light on the urge to fit in as a half Asian kid.
When you're a young kid, everyone around you changes how you think of yourself. So when I would go out and I would want to be with Westerners because they were going out clubbing and they maybe had more money, and I got influenced into thinking that that was the life I wanted to live rather than being with my local friends who are just having quieter lives and didn't do the things that I saw as fun because that's what I saw on TV or celebrities doing. So I never really knew where I should go or what I should do. And I try to fit into different groups without really thinking what I wanted to do myself. So this identity crisis was always not really understanding if I fit into one because I was half. I didn't feel comfortable to be just with the Westerners or just with the Chinese because I wasn't Western enough to be Western and I wasn't Chinese enough to be Chinese.
A similar experience which a lot of Asian Americans could resonate with was also mentioned by Subtle Asian Baking founder Kat Liu when she described her Asian experience in America.
Growing up as an Asian American, it's a duality, I think. It's a dichotomy. And also, at the same time, you're also questioning who you are. That's why I started it with saying, like, who am I, right? Am I American enough? Am I Asian enough? If I go to Hong Kong or I go to Vietnam, am I an other, or am I part of them?
A question that I have often asked myself since I was a kid is, who am I? Am I an extension of my parents, my family? Am I where I was born? Am I where I grew up? Or am I where I've lived and traveled? Am I where I was educated? Or am I where I work or have worked? Am I the lessons I've learned along the way? At different stages in life, I find that different people have different interpretations of who I am based on their own understanding about the world. Sometimes they even come up with interpretations of who I am that are totally untrue. You know, for example, questions like, are you Korean? You must be Japanese because you have fair skin. Are you sure you're not Korean? While I used to get frustrated about people coming up with assumptions before even waiting for the other person to answer, I came to understand the questions people ask also reflect who they are and what they know or have experienced. And sometimes they just genuinely want to know, but did not know the questions they ask were not the best questions to ask anyone. But at times, I still can't help but wonder, how come even with centuries of globalization, colonization, and migration, some people who are even well-traveled and highly educated still hold the outdated belief of you are what you look like? But perhaps what Indian software engineer Ravi Prakash said on episode 3 helps give a bit of context around why people think a certain way.
When you see a different person, you make a perception. And now the perception comes with either positive or negative. And that depends upon your previous experience. That's why I said being racist or biased is totally normal, actually, totally natural. It's going to come naturally to you. Have you met all the Indian person who work with the IT? Then you're going to think that, yeah, all the Indian person works in IT. These restaurant people, who they have met an Indian person who comes on a motorcycle and pick up a food for Food Panda. So that's how they know them. So for them, it's a natural response.
And a similar situation is also experienced by Filipino domestic helpers in Hong Kong, as pointed out by our guest on episode 5, British Macanese Filipino Jacqueline Garwood.
It's crazy though, because I think local Hong Kongers are just accustomed to thinking Filipinos are domestic helpers just because maybe they don't come across a lot in their everyday life, except for maybe their helper, who is essentially part of their family. I hope they treat them like part of their family. I don't know why they have to be part of a little bubble. And I just feel like you shouldn't base it off how people look. Like, you don't know who they are. You don't live their life.
But now the other question is, why do we need to label ourselves? As time passes, people change. Who we are today might not be who we are tomorrow. There would be times when I thought being myself meant becoming the person that I used to think I would become as a child, which would be a journalist. I used to think financial journalism was the only thing that I would be doing for the rest of my life. But then I would be missing out on so much fun if I only allowed myself to do that. I still get excited following stories related to business and the global economy, don't get me wrong, but I also find myself enjoying my current day job advising global corporations on how to deliver credible and impactful information while having a lot of fun creating Proudly Asian, talking to you guys. So sometimes you just need to allow yourself to go off track a little and be led to a place that you never imagined you would go, but is way more amazing than you could ever imagined. Now back to Proudly Asian. By showcasing the stories of fellow Asians from around the world, I would like to highlight that Asian stories are familiar and relatable stories from our daily lives. It's not just Asians who grew up in immigrant families. It's not exclusive to Asians. The urge to fit in is definitely not just an Asian thing. Whether you are white, black, Asian, or a bit of everything, stories on Proudly Asians are all relevant to you, and this is a safe space for us to learn, grow, ask questions, and celebrate each other's stories. Stories of Asians are stories of regular people. They are full of joy, challenges, laughter, tears, celebrations, and obstacles that you and I experienced every day. And for those who are listening, and if you are not Asian, I have genuine appreciation for you because you're basically making the first step, trying to get to know more about the backgrounds of your Asian friends and the struggles of Asians around the world. And don't be afraid to reach out to us on Instagram, on social media, or any platforms or channels that you could reach out to us. Don't be afraid to ask questions if there are any parts within any of the episodes that you listen to that you don't understand, because this is a safe space for us to learn, ask questions, and just understand the world that we live in. This is important because when Pixar's Turning Red came out, there were a significant number of people and film critics who called the movie not relatable, while a key theme of the movie is about puberty and changes and anxiety teenagers go through at that age. Now, this brings us to the discussion of biases. Back in March, we did a series of International Women's Day special episodes featuring inspiring women from around the world who are breaking biases in their own fields. We heard from Ube Book's author Annie Chang about biases against Filipino nurses in America, wellness entrepreneur and sound healer Yinki Wong about the power of the feminine, and Meta product manager Clarice Chan about breaking the bamboo ceiling and ageism.
The bias in many ways, at least for women and Asian women, is that we're meant to follow someone. I think a lot of people expect us either to be obedient or to not actually be leading the charge. And I think, we're just at a time where that bias in particular, I'm excited to see and hopefully break, in the workplace. And I think we need far more representation there. And there are so many other biases. I think age in particular, I think as Asians, we obviously look a lot younger. And so I think, there's sort of this underestimation, both being Asian and being a woman and looking fairly young, sort of at any professional stage of your career. And I think in tech, ageism is certainly a bias that we're constantly fighting and wrestling with and otherwise. But I think that idea of, people can lead and thrive and do anything at all ages, at all stages of their career.
Being bias-free is indeed a choice. We are all born with some kind of biases and prejudices based on our upbringing, education, and personal experiences, and it's okay. But we can always choose to not be dominated by our own biases, our own thoughts, our own judgment, our own assumptions. Before we make an assumption and say it out loud as if it's fact, we need to take a pause and ask ourselves, do we have any evidence to support this assumption that just popped up in our head? It takes practice, but having this awareness is important. While there are biases against Asians by Westerners, it is also important to highlight there are biases against Asians from other Asians as well. Just remember, it is not the end of the world if you realize you might be biased against others. Everyone is biased to a certain degree. And the first and foremost thing you could do is acknowledge bias exists. Then practice taking a pause before you ask anyone any questions that could be fueled by biases and assumptions. And finally, when you get good at that, begin calling out biases that you notice around you, either in the workplace, in a family setting, among friends, or even strangers. That's a start. And as our guest for episode 13, Claudia Chang, said,
please just keep in mind that we go through this as Asians a lot, and just to be sensitive to what you guys say to us. And it's not cute when you think we're Asians and so we have to be submissive or we act a certain way. Like, we all have individual personalities. We all have different backgrounds. We all grew up differently. We're our own person. So if you don't want us to stereotype you guys, don't stereotype us.
To wrap up, it has been a truly rewarding journey creating Proudly Asian, the podcast. Along the way, I've met some incredible podcasters who are equally amazing people. Here, I would like to give a shout out to some of my fellow podcasters. Curtis from the Infatuation podcast, Rox and Jules from the Asian Soup podcast, Teddy from A Briefcase podcast, and Linda from the Banh Mi podcast. Do spend some time to check out the podcasts if you're interested to explore more shows created by Asian podcasters from around the world. From true crime to heartwarming conversations about the Asian experience in different continents, they've got you covered. Also, I must say thank you to all our listeners from the US, UK, Hong Kong, Canada, Philippines, Australia, Sweden, Germany, Vietnam, Japan, Poland, Chile, Taiwan, Malaysia, Netherlands, France, New Zealand, South Korea, and so many more. It is truly amazing to see people from around the world are tuning in, and definitely don't feel shy about reaching out to let me know what you want to know more about and listen on the podcast. I would really love to get to know more about your stories and what it's like living in the places that you're based. And with this episode, I'm proud to say that it marks the end of Proudly Asian Season 1, and I'm working my hardest to prepare for Season 2, which is going to be launched in June. So we won't be gone for long. During our season break, I will also use the time to just give myself a tiny breather, since the months of April and May have been crazy busy for me work-wise and personally, as we also try to see if there is a chance for us to travel to visit families in the coming months. So that's it for now. No words can express how grateful I've been about the support and kind words that you all have been giving me. And if I could ask you for a favor at all, please follow Proudly Asian on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts, and leave a 5-star review. We are also very active on social media, especially Instagram, so please follow us there at proudly.Asian, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find by searching Proudly Asian Podcast. We have weekly videos and exclusive content there also. Check us out on proudly-asian.com. It's our new digital home that we launched just before Easter. It's very nice chatting with you guys this way. Maybe I'll think about doing this more regularly. But now, we will be back with Season 2 in June. Meanwhile, take care there and stay connected with us on Instagram if you miss us. See you soon. That's it for this episode of Proudly Asian. Don't forget to follow us on Instagram at proudly.asian for more content. We are on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. Thanks for tuning in. Signing off for now. I'm Isabel Wong.